Let's have a conversation about inmates and food. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist, and trigger warning, I will be talking about sensitive topics. For many years, I worked with inmates, you know, including pretrial, probation, inmates in the halfway house, as well as those that are in custody. And one of the most challenging areas for a lot of inmates to work in is the kitchen. And the reason why the kitchen, even at my facility where I worked, there's a lot of stuff that goes down in the kitchen, and a lot of it involves sexual activity. And just like even in my institution, like we had a staff cafeteria, it was never open just because there was so much stuff going down in that kitchen and things like that. And so it's always been a difficult, just bear in mind, this is my experience. Other facilities may have a different idea, although I've worked with inmates in different capacities in other places. And again, I've always found that it's, in the kitchen, food area, all that kind of stuff. There's usually food and sex goes together in the kitchen. And the reason being is because a lot of stuff can get through the kitchen without supervision. So you have like food deliveries and food prep, and so the supervision is a little bit less sparse. And that even extends to, a lot of times, when I worked with inmates here, that were, transitioning, so they were maybe in the halfway house or they were on parole. A lot of places that are felon friendly and where they can get employed is, again, working around food, like meal preps and things like that. And one of the things about those types of places is they usually don't pay a lot of money. But again, it's, even if an inmate is still in custody, like they're on ankle monitor, halfway house type stuff, there's still, little to no supervision. And first thing inmates want to do when there's little to no supervision is have sex. Have as much of it with as many people as possible, because that's usually the first time in many years that they've had privacy or they've had access to people that they can have sex with, where it's like, they don't, they have more than a few seconds or a few minutes. And so they're usually unsupervised. And so they want to have as much of it as possible. And a lot of it is around food preparation. And I'm not kidding. I used to run groups on this kind of stuff, educating inmates, talking about safety and privacy, and when they're not supposed to do it and things like that. But a lot of people, as soon as they get that first taste of freedom, and this is women and men, so both of them are equally just as rabid to have sex as soon as they are able to do that. And it's all they could talk about, like, oh my God, did you see this person? Blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna get my hands on him and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of the groups that I would have around that, when they're discharged or when they get that first place of employment, was around safety and being appropriate, sex education, privacy, cleanliness, managing impulse control and things like that. And so that would be a group that was in regular rotation. But I digress. Again, these places are felon friendly. A lot of them didn't make a lot of money, and so sex was what they looked forward to having the most when they worked in food prep, these meal prep companies and things like that are felon friendly. That is what they would look forward to most. And I'm not going to say all of them, but by and large, it was quite a few, so much so that group that I ran in particular was in regular rotation. And I ran that group, so I ran it for quite a while. But that was always something. And it's something to keep in mind whenever you're hiring, or whenever like, prisoners are hired for like cheap labor and things like that, there's not always a lot of supervision. And the reason being, you have to think about it from just like a staffing standpoint. And again, I can't speak for all areas. I can just speak for the ones that I worked at and what I was familiar with at that time. Is like you can only pull so many staff away from institutions and things like that, to do transports, to actually be there to supervise. So it's not like usually an army full of COs or things like that. And so, but people are still very much also, inmates are also still, a lot of them are still very much struggling with addiction, or they get out and they get around somebody that's got an addiction, or it's just been a long time and it's like, hush, and so that is something that tends to happen. So I hope that helps. Let me know what you think. Like, comment, share, and follow. Thanks so much.